The title of my capstone is Nonprofit Topics. So those of you who have taken my course may say, oh, well, it's just all the same stuff. Not really. And so what I want to do is explain a little bit about the course, and I think I have to do that by giving you examples of what's been done in the past. Because unlike the other two capstones, this course is all over the place. It doesn't use one analytical tool like simulation modeling, which I think is an incredibly powerful tool. And if you don't have any exposure to it, I mean, I kept thinking, oh, they should take Rudy's course. No, they should take Bill's course. They should. Anyway, in my course, students use a variety of analytical tools. All the projects are very customized, and it really depends on the client needs or your reader's needs. So you have an external audience from the very start of the course. You are writing for someone else. This is not just an academic exercise. So you're going to have to deliver this to someone. And so how you approach your project is driven by their needs and our judgments of what works best in terms of giving them something that you can stand behind and feel proud of. And also potentially share with others as you go on the job market. But that means that one student in the class might be doing a very qualitative type of approach, another one may be doing something entirely differently. And we have to kind of be able to, as a class, work together to help all the projects along. To kind of give you a little sense of the types of observed problems where there's some kind of gap, someone wants some answers, some recommendations. Let's see, last year we had a group that worked on police officers' perceptions of the use of body cams here in Ohio. So some police departments in the state have adopted them, some have not. Sometimes it has been forced on the department, sometimes the departments themselves have chosen to use them. And so our client was the Fraternal Order of Police, and a survey went out to all the members of the FOP, and we learned quite a bit about what police officers were thinking about these, made some recommendations for police departments in going forward at whatever stage of implementation they were at, whether they had made the decision to use them, been forced to use them, or were just sort of considering it. Another example, this is one individual student. So the projects can be group-based or individual-based. So one individual student, his client was Trinity United Methodist Church. And what she was interested in, and her client was interested in, was how the church could leverage its social media platforms more efficiently, more effectively, to provide services to existing members, but also as a recruitment tool for particular target markets. You can see this is pretty different than the Fraternal Order of Police project, right? So no surveys went out. It was a lot of really looking at that social media data that they already had, doing some comparisons with other churches and what they were doing and the data that could be collected from those other churches. Pretty interesting project. Let's see, a third one, again, very, very different. This one much more HR focused, was about the scope of practice for community health workers. Community health workers, do you all know what community health workers are? Anyone not know? These are the folks that often don't have a lot of medical training. They're out in communities, drawn from the community. Often that's their greatest asset, is maybe they speak the language, know the culture in a particular neighborhood. Hospitals around the state use them in varying ways. And so the client was Neomed, and there has been efforts to think about trying to credential or license or kind of force certain requirements on these community health workers. So this group took that on to see whether this was feasible, made some sense to try to look at the scope of practice for these community health workers across the state. And then just the last example here, we had a group that had the Children's Defense Fund in Ohio as their client. And I think it was Rudy, you mentioned infant mortality, and some of your African fellows looked at that and modeled it, we could have used your model. Because this particular group looked at the variety of programs across the country with states that had chosen to fund infant mortality programs and what could be learned from those program evaluations on those programs. Taking that back to the state of Ohio and the Children's Defense Fund to see if there was something more we could do in this state to deal with infant mortality and where it's more prevalent, which is in the African American communities around the state. So looking particularly for programs that were addressing those communities. So those are just examples of how diverse the projects can be and the approaches to them. One thing that I decided I would do a little differently this year is to have us really focus on how people process information. So Rudy talked a little bit about data visualization and how important that is, and how you can sort of completely lose your audience if you put that crazy model up there and they're like, yeah, right. Thank you for take your money, go away. So what we will do kind of as joint projects as we work through our own audience's needs and ways they're likely to kind of process the information we give them, we're going to look at comparing and critiquing nonprofit annual reports, state of the sector, the nonprofit sector in various states put out these economic impact reports, management consulting reports for various nonprofits, just to sort of look and see, does their theory of change make sense? How can we kind of really dig in and more carefully assess what's really being said in these reports? Understand the strengths and weaknesses of what we've got here. The point being that you can become more critical consumers. Not only can you produce a very polished report that you should be very proud of and willing to share if your client allows it, but also that you can be a critical consumer of others' reports. So that's part of the goal and looking through that. So if you want to be in a capstone where you're punching holes into other people's arguments, you are telling them their data is crap and you can't draw any conclusions from it, where you're really trying to sort of figure out what you can authentically say, how far you can go in your interpretation of the findings from your analysis. Come to our capstone, but have a very thick skin, because we will look for every way that we can undermine what you're trying to say to make it stronger and stronger. That's all I got for you.
Any quick questions from the room?
Yes.
Question back there?
So the partnerships with the different agencies, do the students bring those to the class with them? How is coordinated?
Yeah. Well, actually, let's see. Of these 4 that I mentioned, 1 I brought in, and the other 3, well, 2 of them the students had in mind right from the start. And another one we worked together to come up with the right reader or client for it. So it happens in different ways. Usually I come in with a set of projects, clients who are there ready to get engaged with, but still you need to talk with them, sort of shape the project. But they've got some ideas of what might work for them. But you can also, if you're planning on taking my capstone, you can come and talk to me ahead of time, because even though you don't need to hit the course running with the client in mind, it does help you. It just makes it slightly less stressful if you already know which client you're going to be working with.